I'm Arti Miraj, Deputy Editor of Corporate Secretary magazine. Welcome to another one of our short interview segments. Today, I'll be talking with Steve Shapiro, who is currently a corporate partner at Pritchard, Nichols & Meeks. He also has extensive experience as a general counsel and corporate secretary at Cole Taylor Bank. In 2010, Steve was named Small and Mid-Cap Governance Professional of the Year by Corporate Secretary magazine.
In my opinion, convergence is the grouping together of several different opinions and synthesizing them into one voice that speaks for the company in terms of compliance, risk, and governance. I think it's important to keep in mind that when you sit down and think of a corporation, the employees and the resources of compliance and risk and governance and some of the other support functions is actually usually a very small portion of the company's budget. They're out there trying to make money. They're out there trying to get their message across. And it's very important for that small group of people to speak as one. And I think it's also important that as those different departments and professionals work through the issues that they need to work through on behalf of the company, to work through some of the issues that may differ in order to be able to make it more effectively apply. And I think if they speak as one voice, it's more likely that people are more likely to follow those principles. And so convergence is the combination of all of those professionals working together to create one set of principles that particular company can follow effectively in carrying out its business strategy. I think you're seeing more and more of it as regulation increases, costs mount, and revenue becomes difficult to achieve for companies. And even technology makes it, on the one hand, makes it very easy, but it also makes it's harder to comply with various corporate initiatives, and makes it more likely that there need to be restrictions for that as well. Compliance, risk, and governance should be linked together. I do think it's the best strategy, and let me explain why. I think that it's very difficult for a company to try to observe three different regimes. And I think it's important for compliance, risk, and governance to be one type of thing that the company has to comply with. If you have a head risk officer, you have a corporate secretary who's usually in charge of governance, and then you have a chief compliance officer, and they're telling the businesses, and they're telling the board, and they're telling the executives three different things. One of two things will happen. One is that none of it will be implemented, or two is that they will take so much time explaining their different perspectives that it won't be implemented the way it should. And so I think it's very important for who's ever in charge of compliance, who's ever in charge of governance, who's ever in charge of risk at various companies, need to make sure that they're all on the same page. It will also save money, because you won't have a separate report from the compliance officer, from the compliance officer, you won't have a separate report from the risk manager, you won't have a separate report from the governance person. They won't be hiring separate outside consultants whose opinions need to be integrated. It'll all be part of one strategy. The board, the executives, and the businesses can follow one strategy for corporate governance, risk, and compliance, and it will save money and more likely to be adopted as part of the business strategy, because it's only one group of rules and principles that need to serve as guidance. I think there are a number of ways that corporate secretaries and general counsels can incorporate GRC into corporate business strategy. So let me go through some of the examples. The first is that they need to clearly articulate what the goals of the governance and risk assessment are. That means they need to understand the underlying issues. If you speak in paragraphs first, as opposed to speaking in head points, it's harder to get the message across, and it's harder for business people who are trying to run a business and trying to make money for a company to hear you unless they have a vested interest in the subject. So communication is absolutely very effective. And when there's uncertainty in the regulations, that needs to be communicated as well. One of the issues that you realize when you're a corporate secretary or general counsel is that you're in a staff function, as are HR folks, financial management, investor relations for certain companies, as well as compliance. And it's important to keep in mind that your focus may not be the same focus of the business people. And you need to make sure that when you are communicating these new rules that need to be complied with, that they're phrased in terms of how the business people can get value out of them. It's also important for all of those staff functions to be on the same page. The last thing that a CEO or a CFO or a head of a business wants to do is arbitrate between the HR interpretation of a particular regulation and the legal interpretation of a regulation and the compliance of the regulation.